What we're going to do now for about the next 20 minutes, half an hour or so, is I'm going to talk about the trapping techniques that would have been common in the 1800s. I've got a bunch of stuff for show and tell. I will try my best to explain everything that's there. If you've got a question and you haven't talked about it yet, stick around at the end and ask the question, and I'm more than happy to talk about it. There's a few things I have as well that you can either see or smell or touch. You'll be able to, but we're doing that towards the end. It just makes it a little bit smoother. And just so anybody's worried as well, I do not get people up out of the audience to do something silly. I can't stand doing that myself, so I won't do that to anybody else. First and foremost, what animal has the most significant impact on Canada as a country? Guesses? I know you know it. Yes?
Beaver.
Yes, why? Why beaver?
Beaver trade.
Pardon me?
Beaver trade.
Yeah, the beaver trade, but why were they after the beaver trade?
Because they were making hats.
Yes. What type of hats? Yes?
Felt hats with nice the inner fur.
Top hats.
Yeah.
They're making the top hats. So the top hats, you see the gentlemen walking around, the black hats that they're going, that was the reason for the fur trade. That was the prime reason. People were looking for and they wanted those top hats, but when I say people, I mean people of status. So if you can imagine having one piece of clothing, if you have somebody who works in the trades, if you're an apprentice level, can you imagine every cent you make for 18 months to 2 years to purchase one piece of clothing? That's how expensive those hats would be. Because remember, in the Victorian time and the fur trade era, there were the wealthy and the poor. So we didn't have a middle class at that time. So even all the skilled trades, the apprentices, the journeymen, they were not considered wealthy. Wealthy would be people like your doctors, your lawyers, your elected officials, government heads. Those would be the ones that would have that. They would be expected, even on days like this when it's super hot, to maintain their station by wearing the appropriate clothes. They would have the shirts on, the vest, the cummerbunds, the coats, the trousers, the top hat to show off everything. They would never dress down to look anything like me. It would be beneath them to even go outside and take their jacket off. That would be seen as being you're being too relaxed. So those furs need to be trapped on this continent and shipped to England. And again, if you think back at the time that I'm talking about, this post right here, this is the third Fort Langley. First one was in 1827 down in Derby, a couple kilometers down the river. They didn't like it because it flooded all the time. So they moved up to here. They built the second Fort Langley. Sloppy work on the hand of the blacksmith, sorry, it burnt to the ground. The third one they built, 1840, 1839, 1840. That building over there is the oldest building in British Columbia on its original foundation. That was the storehouse that was in here when this was the actual post. That's not a prop. The wall around here, it's not a military post. That wall is just to keep people out of the storehouses where all the expensive stuff is. I, as a trader and a trapper, I can only come and I have to conduct all my business through that hole in the wall behind you. So if you can imagine, I'm going to bring all my furs in that I've traded all year, or anything that I've traded with the First Nations, and I want to store up for the coming year. You would come to that door, that little trade portal. What you would do is give all your furs down. They would take a look at them and grade them, telling you how much they were worth. You would give them a list of what you wanted. They would take that list, they would go across to that white storehouse, they would gather up what you had asked for, and they would bring it back. As soon as you got it, you could check to make sure it's not damaged, and that's it, trade's finished. There's nothing like Costco. You can't bring it back next year when it's broken and dull and say, I want a new one. And if you mess it up or lose it, that's your problem, not theirs. Those furs that they trade from here will end up going to Europe. That means that there's a dock down on the Fraser River. They will package all the furs here, send them down by carrying them down to the river, load them onto a ship. It will sail out the Fraser River, past Fort Victoria, out to the Sandwich Islands, which you now call Hawaii. They will get rid of some of the gear that they need for there. They will gear up for the coming trip. Back over diagonal to the North American, South American continent, south around the southern tip of South America, around Cape Horn, diagonal across to England. a trip that would take sometimes between 4 and 8 months, depending on the season. Now those ships that they're on, they're not like the BC ferries, they're not like the cruise ships that are very luxurious. The ship, the hull of that ship would be smaller, if not maybe equal size to that building. So the white one over there. So if you can imagine being on a ship no bigger than that building for 5 months on the North Atlantic, it would take a while to get over there. Now, the furs that I have, now I will come around so a few people can feel. I'm not going to be able to come right through, so this is one of the things I say at the end. If you've got an interest, come up and feel that. So this is a beaver fur. This is what they were looking for. This is the starting portion of the top hats for the gentlemen. But this is brown and the top hats are black. They dye them. So this as well. This one right now would not be worth anything, because if you look on this side, there's all this fat and grease that's still left on the animal's skin. This is all the connective tissue when it was attached to the animal. If I brought this into trade, I would be shooed away because I'm bringing garbage in. This would not survive the trip. This would rot before it got there. So what they're going to be doing is they're going to be taking a look at these. We're going to go back to the fur side. There's 2 types of fur on a beaver hide. And when at the end of it, come up so you can feel it. Usually the whole beaver hide has got this long hair that's on the outside here. I've already started processing the hair on here, but underneath the hair is a soft downy fur. That is the fur that they would be using for the hides. So if you can imagine, the hat production was not on this continent. It was in England. So who's going to be getting rid of all of that? Because you got the Industrial Revolution happening where you're getting machines starting, but you still have jobs that require just manpower. So the first part you need to do is, how old are you?
I'm 8.
8? Way too old. No, you're 7, I know that.
6. I'm actually
You're 6? Good, you're hired as a worker. 6 years old. Unskilled labor. His job would be, and if you can imagine in a factory, there's big stacks of these furs. His job is nothing more than hand picking all of that long hair out, because that will come out, the downy stuff won't. Now, he is going to work, and again, this is not called child labor, this is called a job. He's going to work 6 days a week, 12 to 14 hours a day. If he works too slow, if somebody who's the boss or the foreman thinks that he's working too slow, it is well within their rights to speed them up, whether that's a stick or a strap or berating. Any guesses how much they're going to be paid per week for that kind of job? I know you know, put your hand up. Any guesses?
25.
Oh, you're way too. Guesses? Still way too much. $1? Oh, 2 pennies a week. 2 English pennies a week. What would be the point, people say? At this time frame, a loaf of bread was a penny. So now all of a sudden you can bring that much more food. You might have 6 to 8 kids. Right up until the 1920s, the expected child mortality was 25 to 30%. So if you had 8 kids, 2 of them are not going to live to the time they're 5. All of those kids can go to work. Not like today where they're still living with you at 38. They're going to work. Every person that's working in the house brings more food, brings more money. Now all of a sudden the station of your family actually improves a little bit. So that's the kids that are hand picking all of that. Once that is all picked off, we're not going to get rid of all of that because the Hudson's Bay Company and all its wisdom for making money. What they are going to do is, this gentleman here has a company that makes padded furniture, or at least cushions. He's going to come and he's going to buy all of that fur that's been plucked off. How many people have sat on Great Aunt Mabel's antique chair and felt like you've got pins in your backside? Quite often, those antique chairs are stuffed with hair. They eventually work into the fabric and then eventually into your skin when you sit down. So he'd be able to purchase all of that hair as stuffing for his business. Once the hat makers get everything cleaned off, they will shave that downy stuff off. That leaves the hide. That can go to a tannery, which can turn it into leather, which can become boots, gloves, jackets, belts, anything else. Now, that fur, that would now go to the people who are making the hats. They're called hatters. How many people have heard the story of Alice in Wonderland? Yeah? Okay, what's that really crazy guy? Johnny Depp does a great job doing him. Mad Hatter. That's not just a quaint term. Does anybody here do any wool felting? Wool felting, you basically agitate wool with a little bit of water and some agitation, and it becomes oh, it's just the Smith right over there. It just becomes felt like you get at Michael's. So what they would do is all that stuff they shaved off, that would be put into cauldrons and mixed with things like mercury and arsenic, agitated and heated, and then drawn out through some of the tools they have to turn them into sheets of felt. That felt would be cut by templates, lacquered, dyed, glued, steamed into the various shapes of the hats. Now those people who are working with that, the hatters, you're exposed to that heavy metal poisoning, not only through breathing it, but through your hands. So by the age of about 40, you are mad. Why would somebody do that, for heaven's sake? Well, for their working life, they are rubbing shoulders with very important people that can afford those hats, so their station is up here. They can become wealthy, but they're not considered wealthy. They're not upper class. Now, the hat making process and that's that bit. I'll put that aside. Back to the trapping piece. When I trap these, what I need to do before I bring them in is, for anybody that asks, yes, the animal dies when the skin comes off. Now what I'm going to do is, once I get the skin off the animal, two things I'm going to do. There's two sets of glands that a beaver has just ahead of its back legs. One set of glands produces an oil that they waterproof their hide with. The other produces a musky scent that they mark their territory with. That is not urine, it's not excrement, it's just a scent, it's a musk scent. And I'll talk about that shortly. What I do now is, if you ever do any walking around the forest or down to the river, you find either willow or something called spirea. It's a type of bush that grows really long and skinny. It can be up 6, 7, 8 feet long and about the size of my fingers. I will cut a couple pieces of that, lay my hide on the ground, and then stretch one of these hoops around it. I will lace the hide to it, and then I'll pull it somewhat tight. Now normally I do this on the ground, but you won't be able to see it. So what I will do, there we go, is I have a set of tools with me that are made out of other animals that I've hunted at some point. So the first one is a moose leg bone, which has got a chisel point, but it's got these teeth in it. I use that first to get all that grease and fat off. What I do when I'm on the ground is I kneel on this and I scrape that from the inside out. And you can see I've started here because I've got this white section here. I've still got stuff around the outside to work on. Once I'm done scraping that, I'm going to change that over to another bone. It's a leg bone from a deer. This one does not have the teeth, but it's just got a chisel point. So I'm just going to do the same thing and scrape that all over. When I'm completely finished, it takes me about an hour, hour and a bit to scrape this whole thing off. What I'm going to do is I need to dry this. I'm going to take this and I'm going to keep it on. There used to be a lovely big maple right here that was my backdrop, and I'd put it up in the tree. Keeps it away. I'm not worried about bugs. Animals I'm not too worried about, except for the two-legged type. I'm going to put it up there and dry and let it dry. I'm going to work and keep on working to the various areas where my traps are. If I'm going to take this and start moving towards coming into a post, I'm going to go collect it. Now if I come back and my trap, or not my trap, but all of my furs are gone, and I can see footprints that somebody's come and taken it, I hunt and trap for a living. I can track things through the bush. So if I see footprints, I'm going to go after those footprints to get my supplies back. Taking that from me would be like me going to your bank account and taking your bank account. So there's no 911 and there's no social assistance for people that are at the time. So if you, sir, with the black t-shirt, if you're the one that has come taking this, I'm going to track you down and we are going to settle our differences, and as long as he's not bigger, tougher, meaner, and faster than I am, I'm going to get my furs back. At that point, I would gather them all up. When I'm ready to move and they're all dry, I'll cut them off, fold them up, and then I can bring them in. Now the trapping per se, these are traps. That's a two-spring leghorn. That's a two-spring beaver trap. That one's a muskrat trap. The springs are these pieces on the side. Now in the 80s, there were bumper stickers that said ban the leg hole traps. This is what they were talking about. These are illegal to use now. There is still a fur trade going on. The posts are Thompson, Manitoba and Edmonton. That's where all the furs go into. They've made these humane, so what they've added, instead of just something that holds the feet, is that there's a spring steel that comes off, so when the animal gets his foot stuck in it, the other spring flips over, planning to break its neck so it kills it quickly. How these are set is what I'm going to be doing. First of all, trapping is done mostly in the wintertime. Any guesses why?
Furs thicker.
Fur's thicker. No different than us. Wintertime, you're going to put more clothes on. Wintertime, to insulate the animal, their furs are going to get thicker. So if you take a winter hide versus a summer hide, the winter one can be up to 2 times as thick. Well, if I'm bringing them in and they're giving me a weight value of it, I'd rather bring in winter ones. So if you're trapping with me, we are going to go down to the river in November. It is pouring rain and you're already soaking wet. My clothes are never dry, ever. Rheumatism and arthritis, very common. We are going to find what animals are around. We're going to walk into the river, knee, thigh deep basically, and set these traps. You're going to put that across your leg. You're going to force the jaws down, or the springs. You're going to open the jaws, and that trigger is going to be set like so. Just like that. Now if I'm trapping for animals that live on land, like fox or coyote, it's too small for a wolf, so I'm not going to do that. I'll attach that to big stumps or rocks. And I'll show you in a moment what the beaver traps look like if I'm going to trap for things in the water. The idea with this, animal walks along, steps on that snaps shut and holds onto them. Animal walks along. Oh. That's not designed to cut or break anything, it's just designed to hold onto them. If I'm trapping for animals in the water, oh yeah, that's a smaller one, that's a muskrat trap. Same principle, one spring and you can open it with one hand. You've probably noticed at some point, if you go down to the river, you'll notice that there's places where you have the mud beaten down. Maybe you got some of the sticks that have got the chew marks on them. That would be the indicator that there's beaver around. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stay in that area because most animals tend to always repeat the same, coming back to the same spot. So to set a trap for animals in the water, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cut a long pole, like so. That goes through there. I'm going to tie a weight to the other side of that. I'm going to walk in the water again, and on my back I carry an axe with me, and I'm just going to hammer that into the ground. I'll hold it so it doesn't fall on this gentleman. I'm going to open that trap, and I'm going to gently set it on the bottom of the creek or the lake or swamp or whatever that I'm going around. This other side is just a heavy weight. That's just going to get tossed into the water. Now the idea is that the animal comes along and they get their foot stuck in that. So what I've got to do, every time I touch this, what am I leaving on it? Scent. Do I smell good?
No.
Oh, you can tell already. I know you. Don't answer. Hygiene in the 1800s is not what we're used to today. I'm assuming most people have had a bath or a shower today. If not today, maybe yesterday. You can imagine that maybe once a season, Europeans, especially the trappers, were not necessarily the cleanest people in the world. We all sweat. Our bodies smell regardless. If you work with livestock or fish, you start to take on the smell of what you're working with. To get rid of that scent, I need to cut those glands out of the animal's body, boil them in water, and skim off the oil that comes out of it. Oil always floats on top of water. When I'm trapping, I will put these bottles around my neck. And in case you are interested, at the end I do actually have some beaver bait lure you can smell. Not urine, not excrement. What I do is I need to get rid of the human scent on there. So I'll walk in there and I will take that off. This is just a hollowed out elk antler and the other is just a hollowed out stick. I'm going to get a stick in there and I'm just going to put some of that bait lure about 8 inches above the water. Now, yes, I spill this. Yes, I get this on my hand. So there's another scent that adds to my repertoire. I cook over an open fire. Anybody that's gone to camping, you know that after a weekend of camping, everything you own smells like smoke. I also smoke a pipe, mostly in the evening after I eat. Why? I like the smell of the tobacco and I hate bugs. It does both things, gets rid of that. So that kind of gives you an overall palette of what I might smell like. I need to get rid of that smell. So that beaver lure, that oil that comes from their musk glands, I'm going to put it on the stick about 8 inches above the water line. Beaver are territorial. If they smell somebody that's not theirs in their territory, they're going to investigate it. I don't put the smell on the water line because if they come up to it, they can just float up and smell it and go, no, that's not anybody I know, and then off they go. I don't get any beaver fur. If I put it 8 inches above, they swim up, they smell it, they want to get up and smell it. So of course, up they go. Where do the back legs go? Down. Snap. As soon as that snaps on there, they can't get away from here because that's holding them down. Their defense is to go into deep water. They'll go down, well, they'll drag that rock with them. That'll hold that down. The beaver drowns. I come back in a day or two, check my traps, grab the pole, pull it, the chain, the trap, the beaver, and the weight out. Skin comes off. I won't start scraping that yet. I'll reset this, rebait it, make sure it's not broken, and then carry on. That, the traps on that, similar here if you're going after muskrat, because muskrat look like rats, they just got a different shaped face. You can set that, but with not as much. You don't need the weight on the end to get that. So those traps, as I said, if anybody's heard me before when I was doing the firearms demonstration, metal, iron, was not manufactured here. At this time period, everything that was made of metal came from Europe. So this would have been an import from the Hudson's Bay Company. Trappers as well as First Nations would have bought or traded for these. If you had nothing and you wanted to be a trapper, you could come in and you could say, I'd like to be a trapper. You'd have to negotiate your terms, but most of the time a 5-year contract also gave you a pair of boots, trousers, 2 shirts, a blanket, and 6 traps. 4 of the big ones, 2 of the little ones. Now at the end of your 5-year contract, you might still owe money for paying all of that back because you got to pay that back. If these break, I am not a blacksmith, so I can't fix them, but they're useless and they're expensive. So I would have to sweet talk my way to my friend the blacksmith to see if he could weld that or rivet something to make it work. The First Nations obviously have been trapping for animals a very long time before any Europeans showed up. They would use this, but originally, until after contact, these would not have been available. How would they trap? I'm glad you asked me. And you go to the sporting and the hardware section, you will find rolls of wire that look like this. It's brass wire. It's called snare wire. Little label says snare wire. It's $4.69. Costs nothing. I can, from here in the 1840s, I can purchase that for very little, for much less than the traps would be. I can get about 2 dozen snares out of one trap, or out of one roll of wire. Now, to set a snare up, this is where I need you to use your imagination. Because no, I do not carry this whole thing with me. Again, back to anybody that spent any time walking through the forest, you know that animals tend to continue walking on the same path. That's why they call them game trails. So if you can imagine, there's a game trail here. All the grass is beaten down, and you can see that animals have been moving back and forth. I take a close look, and I see little tiny footprints about that big. So, pine marten has been going back and forth in here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to build a visual wall of debris from the forest floor. Rocks, sticks, branches, logs on both sides, but I'm going to leave this open where they're used to walking back and forth. This is a stick that's either still growing in the ground or it's a stick that I've cut and I've just stuck in the ground. It just needs to be springy. It could also be an overhanging branch from a tree. I just need the tension. I'm going to put a piece of that snare wire right here. On the end of it there's a noose, just like that. Now, I'm really creative, a little bit lazy. Part of the trigger mechanism, I just took a branch and broke all the sticks off. And I just stuck that in the ground. Little piece of wood here with a notch cut out. What I'm going to do is I'm going to stretch that down, set that, and that is going to be set like so. Snare is ready. The idea, along comes Martin. He's going to be going along through there, gets through there, tangles, touches, unfamiliar, panics, takes off. When he takes off, whoops, yeah, that was anticlimactic. When that goes through, that trips, up that goes, noose tightens up around the animal's neck, pulls him up off the ground. How many people fish? Okay, what happens when the fish is in the bottom of the boat doing this? What do you do next?
Bang it on the head.
What do I carry on my belt? If not
Axe.
that, a stick. So if it's still alive, it won't be long. Once that's happened, I will take that out of the trap. I will reset this, skin that animal. I will take the skin and I'll take some of the meat with me. Martins and weasels are carnivorous. I'm going to use the meat from this one for the other traps I've got. First Nations have been trapping for a long time before the Europeans showed up. This would have been one of the mechanisms that they trapped with. The Europeans did not create a trade network. All they did was introduce different technology into existing trade routes. The only thing the Europeans introduced was that piece of wire. That's it. Now when I say that the trade networks that are going on, there's a type of shell, it's called dentalia. They're little money tusk shells, they're mollusks. So the little white pieces are dentalia. They only come from one place in the world. It's up the coast in a place called Cayucot. These have been found as far east as the east coast of Canada, all around the Great Lakes, down as far as Florida. So before contact ever happened, these were already circulating across the continent. So the Europeans, all they did was introduce different stuff into an existing trade network. Now, there's another form of trapping called a deadfall. Now, if you can imagine, same thing, we're in the forest. So what I'm going to do is I know the size of the footprints I see, so I know the size of the animal. That tells me how big the trap needs to be. So to go after something like this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to gather up about half a dozen sticks. That length is okay. They need to be a little bit heavier. I'm going to lash them all together, look like a raft. And then I'm going to put lots of rocks and weight on top of that. And then I'll set those aside. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take pieces of straight willow. And all these are, they've got little notches cut on them. I'm going to drive that into the ground. This long pointy stick, remember I said that I'm carrying bits of meat from the previous animals? I'm going to take a piece of the meat from one other animal, wedge that on there. That's the bait stick. That's going to go like so. This other one comes like so. Now I'm going to take all of these weighted ones and bring those up and set them on top. Now obviously my finger's not there, but that would be set. So now if an animal comes along and they eat what's on here, the pressure that's coming down here is all that's holding this together. It's called a figure 4 trap. So as soon as they disrupt that, that's going to collapse. What's going to happen to the weight? It's going to drop and it's going to pin them down. So if I show up and the animal's still underneath, no different than the snare. If it's alive when I get there, it won't be long. Now, interestingly enough, the First Nations also hunted bear with this style of mechanism. But instead of little tiny sticks like this, I would gather sticks up about as round as my arm. I would cut the same notches on them, and if there were 4 or 5 men hunting together, it would be a case of one person that would have to get this set up. The other ones would have obviously much bigger logs, much bigger rocks, more weight. It's up to them to lift everything up, and the one person's got to get underneath and set the trigger. Bear gets underneath, bites that, disrupts the whole thing, collapses, and again, hopefully, it dies quickly because a pissed off bear is really not something you want to be around. Now, a lot of the times with the furs as well, they all had equivalency on value. So the made beaver was basically the medium. Everything else was based on this. If you lived in a swampy area where there's no beaver but there's lots of muskrat, it might take 10 or 15 beavers to equal one muskrat to equal 1 beaver skin. I've got foxes at my tent. You might get 2 foxes to equal 1 beaver skin. These tusks, the money tusk shells, the dentalium, if you had a fathom for me is from fingertip to fingertip, 72 inches, 6 feet. A fathom of those with 40 of that would be equal to 1 beaver skin. So you still had a medium of trade, even though that there was no beaver, which was the medium around. Now, I'm sure by the end of the day, everybody has gone around to the various buildings, and you've probably taken a good look at many of the different Hudson's Bay Company blankets. You'll notice that most of them have a big solid color and a big solid band on the end of it. Various colors, different time frames. And you've got those candy stripe ones. Have you noticed those little marks? The asymmetrical marks on the one side. Anybody aside from you know what those are? What is that?
Years. How much years he on the contract?
Nope. What that is first of all is how many pounds of wool went into that blanket. So 5 pounds of wool. So that's basically bigger than a king size blanket. They go up as far as 8. An 8-point blanket would go pretty well from here to the wall and from this stick to just beyond this post. 2.5-point blanket is like an infant's blanket. Now there is a short time period, 20 to 25 years depending on when you read, that it was also equated to how many beaver skins it took to buy the blanket. So in a sense, for a short time in history, that also was like the original barcoding. And again, that is not as solidly set, but there was like a real crossover where for a short time that was your price tag. So if we look at that as a price tag, if you have somewhere that's all you can get, you need to get 50 to 75 of those for one blanket. Now what would be the purpose? Why would be blankets so sought after, especially here, not on a hot day like this, but in this area? Why were these one of the things that was most sought after as trade? They're warm. It's quite simple. Not only that, it's natural fiber, it's wool. If I take you down to the river and take this blanket and stuck it until it is soaking wet, take it out, snap the water out of it and wrap it around you, there'll be a moment when you get a bit of a chill, but even soaking wet, that will retain 85% of its thermal qualities. Now something like this as well, before I gave my dad a heart attack and cut this blanket up into a coat, which I made. So a capot like this would just be an overcoat. When I go out trapping, at the end of my day, I will find somewhere, so if I don't always need to set up a tent, I will find somewhere underneath trees. Spruce is not too bad, fir is okay, cedar is always good because there's always overhangs. I'll clear everything out underneath there. What I can do is I can just tie this. I carry one other blanket that I wrap around my feet. My hands go inside here. The hood can get pulled up over top, and I can just lay down and go to sleep. I basically got a sleeping bag on. And if need bag is on, I'm going to take this off because yes, I am sweating. And if I pin the outside of those down, the outside corners, and put a stick up through here, I've got a bit of a shade that I can just get under just to keep my head and chest out of the shade. But that's a lot of work and I can just go into the trees. Now I'm basically coming to the end of my talk. If anybody has any questions, I would love to answer them. Obviously I like talking. If you want to take a closer look at some of the stuff or feel it, come up. Aside from that, thank you very much.